All right, let's just jump right in. Welcome, space enthusiasts. I'm your cosmic chronicler, and today we're basically going to be a fly on the wall inside NASA's most intense, high stakes control rooms. We're embarking on an explainer of humanity's absolute most awe inspiring journey to explore the Creator's vast, incredible universe. So, grab a seat, get comfortable, and really focus in because we are looking at the impossible countdown to the moon. And we're going to dive into the incredible and honestly sometimes terrifying reality of what it actually took to get us up there. Okay, let me hit you with this right out of the gate. 15. Just 15. When President John F. Kennedy boldly promised the entire world that the United States would land a man on the moon before the end of the 1960s, do you have any idea how much human spaceflight experience the U.S. actually had under its belt at that exact moment? 15 minutes. Literally. That is it. Alan Shepard went up, came right back down, and boom, Kennedy essentially looks at everyone and says, all right, next stop, the moon. I mean, think about it. It is a situation of utter comedic absurdity. We had a measly 15 minutes of experience, and we gave ourselves just 9 years to conquer the cosmos and reach the moon. Imagine confidently walking into your boss's office right now and saying, hey, I'm going to build a state-of-the-art 100-story skyscraper. But your only actual architectural experience is stacking 2 Lego bricks together. It's absolutely wild. But against all earthly odds, NASA actually committed to this monumental leap of faith into the great unknown. Which brings us to Section 1, Tin Craft and Manual Math. Now, we often think of the smooth, sleek, entirely impenetrable spaceships from science fiction movies. But the terrifying reality of the hardware they actually had to use to cross the deadly void of space, yeah, it was a lot less glamorous and frankly a whole lot more anxiety-inducing. Commander Jim McDivitt actually described the lunar module as being put together with cellophane and tinfoil with scotch tape and bobby pins. I mean, can you even imagine? We are talking about incredibly brave men trusting their lives to machinery that was essentially as fragile as paper, just floating out there in the absolute vacuum of the Creator's universe. It is genuinely shocking. And honestly, it's kind of hilarious in a totally terrifying way that they looked at this crinkly tinfoil box and said, yep, for sure, that'll safely drop us onto another celestial body. So they called it the Spider. That was the affectionately chosen call sign for the bug-like Apollo 9 lunar module. And it was actually the very first true spacecraft, meaning it was designed purely for the vacuum of space. Because there's literally zero air up there to cause friction, it didn't need to be aerodynamic at all. It could be jagged, awkward, and totally bizarre looking. But here is the massive catch, and it's a big one. To save precious weight, it completely lacked a heat shield. So if this Spider failed to successfully dock back with the main command module after its test flight, the astronauts would have absolutely zero way to return to Earth. They would literally burn up attempting to re-enter our atmosphere. Talk about astronomically high stakes. Moving into Section 2, Earth's anger before space conquest. So while all our eyes were glued to the heavens, things down on the ground were incredibly tense. After the tragic fire that claimed the Apollo 1 crew on the launch pad, NASA had to bounce back with breathtaking speed and pinpoint precision. There was absolutely no room left for error. In 1968, Apollo 7 successfully tested the manned command module. Later that same year, Apollo 8 actually orbited the moon. They even read from the book of Genesis as they circled the lunar far side, which is just amazing. Then in early 1969, Apollo 9 tested that terrifying Spider module we just talked about. And finally, Apollo 10 served as the ultimate dress rehearsal, dropping down to just 9 miles above the lunar surface. It was this intense, rapid-fire progression where every single mission built directly onto the success of the last. But as they quickly learned, space is far from empty. They discovered a major, completely invisible hurdle lurking in the dark: mascons. These are massive concentrations of high-density material buried deep, deep in the moon's crust. Basically, think of them as hidden gravity traps placed by the Creator beneath the lunar surface. These mascons exerted an intensely uneven gravitational pull, which effectively turned the moon's orbit into a lethal obstacle course. They could effortlessly rip these paper-thin ships entirely off their meticulously calculated mathematical courses, throwing the astronauts miles and miles away from safety. Now, right as NASA was figuring out how to conquer those orbital gravity traps, there was a really stark contrast happening back home in America. On the actual eve of Apollo 11's historic launch, billions of dollars were sitting out on the launch pad in the form of a towering Saturn V rocket. Meanwhile, right outside Cape Kennedy, earthly tensions kind of boiled over. About 150 protesters, primarily African-American mothers, led by Reverend Ralph Abernathy, gathered to protest poverty. Their argument was super clear. The massive, massive funds shooting off into space were desperately needed for food, shelter, and healthcare right down here on Earth. And what's profoundly interesting is how this tension was actually handled. NASA Director Thomas Paine walked out into the evening to meet the protesters face to face. He told Reverend Abernathy, "If we could solve the problems of poverty by not pushing the button to launch men to the moon tomorrow, we would not push that button." It was just an incredibly respectful exchange of differing priorities. Obviously, they didn't solve poverty that night, but the interaction ended with a firm handshake and Reverend Abernathy sincerely promising to pray for the safety of the astronauts as they ventured out. It's a beautifully grounding reminder of our shared humanity right in the middle of these monumental events. Okay, on to Section 3, Terrifying Alarm and Potential Disaster. All right, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin have finally separated from the command module. They are sealed inside the lunar module, the Eagle, beginning their incredibly steep final descent toward the uncharted lunar surface. The tension in Houston is absolutely palpable. Put yourself right in their zero-gravity shoes for just a second. What does Air 1202 mean when you are exactly 60 seconds from falling onto the moon? 500 million people are watching on live TV, you are mere moments from the lunar surface, and suddenly the master alarm blares. The computer is essentially screaming, "Error 404, brain overloaded." And the genuinely terrifying part? Neither of the astronauts actually knows what this code means. The super simplistic digital display inside the module just flashes the numbers 0212, indicating a 1202 guidance computer overload. The machine had far too many radar tasks and was actively dropping lower priority calculations just to keep the ship from falling out of the sky. The entire fate of the mission, billions of dollars, and the lives of two men suddenly rested squarely on the shoulders of a 26-year-old guidance officer back in Houston named Steve Bales. Bales had only seconds to make a life-or-death call. He realized the computer was overwhelmed, but because the alarm wasn't constant, he made the incredibly gutsy, career-defining decision to give the go command to continue the descent. But listen, we aren't out of the woods yet. The overloaded computer was flying them entirely past their designated landing zone, aiming them directly into a massive football stadium-sized crater filled with jagged rocks. Because they were flying longer, the fuel gauge dropped to absolutely critical levels. So relying purely on his ice-cold test pilot instincts, Neil Armstrong wrestled manual control away from the struggling computer. He had to literally fly this fragile tinfoil box manually, hovering over a field of car-sized boulders, desperately hunting through the thick lunar dust for a flat patch to land. And he was doing this with literally just seconds of fuel remaining in the tanks. Which takes us to Section 4, Eagle landed, a step for history. The unbearable tension finally breaks. Houston, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed. The wave of relief that washed over Mission Control and honestly the entire planet was just unimaginable. Against all earthly odds, software glitches, and car-sized boulders, the impossible mission actually succeeds. And this brings us to the monumental quote absolutely everyone knows. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Over 600 million people, which was a staggering portion of the Earth population at the time, sat glued to these fuzzy black and white televisions, totally united in pure, unadulterated awe as humanity finally stepped foot onto another celestial body in the Creator's vast design. Now, what do they actually do once they got out there? It wasn't just some casual sightseeing tour of gray rocks, you know? They spent a highly choreographed 2 hours and 40 minutes outside the craft. During that brief, historic window, they collected vital moon rock samples, dragging these heavy tools around in cumbersome, pressurized suits. They deployed highly sensitive scientific experiments to measure lunar quakes and the solar winds, and extensively photographed the alien landscape. They basically crammed a full, exhausting day's worth of intensive laboratory work into a couple of hours, all while awkwardly bouncing around in 1/6 gravity. And finally, Section 5, Universe Mystery. What's next? If there's one thing we know about scientific exploration, it's that answering one monumental question really only uncovers 1,000 more intricate mysteries in the Creator's design. President Kennedy's impossible goal was achieved, yes, but the moon landing wasn't an ending, it was barely even a beginning. Could the moon's deeply scarred surface tell the untold story of the early solar system, and in turn our own world's origins? We physically touched the moon, sure, but the real mystery was only just unlocking. Scientists suddenly realized they had a pristine, untouched historical record floating right above us. But actually getting back there to study it, well, space never lets its guard down.
Just when NASA thought they had mastered the cosmos and kind of figured out the routine mechanics of lunar travel, they received a terrifying reminder of how utterly unforgiving the universe truly is. Houston, we've had a problem. Those chilling words from the Apollo 13 mission prove that no matter how much manual math or brilliant engineering we possess, space is never, ever truly safe. But how on earth did they survive that impossible disaster? Well, you're going to have to join me for our next explainer to find out. Until then, keep looking up.